right, diplomacy and beyond. As Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe begins his two-day tour of India, keeping aside all protocols, Prime Minister Modi received Abe at the Ahmedabad airport, and the bonhomie between the two leaders was visible through the roadshow from the opening drive to the Sabarmati ashram. The Indo-Japanese ties will scale a new high as the Japanese Prime Minister lays the foundation stone for India's first bullet train project, which will connect the two financial hubs of Mumbai and Ahmedabad. Remember, Japan is funding more than 81% of that project that will come at a cost of $16 billion. Not just that, the Prime Minister's visit from Japan will give a huge leg up to the infrastructure and defense sector, with Japan chipping in with the know-how and the funds. For Japan, strong bonds with India are crucial at a time when both the countries are facing the Chinese threat and the heat that's coming in from our neighbors. Remember, Japan was the only major country that backed New Delhi openly during the Doklam crisis. All these pointers to a never-before strong ties between the two countries. Are Modi and Abe Asia's new best friends, and how does that really change the dynamic globally? That is exactly what we are debating on the India Development Debate this evening. I'm Supriya Srinath. First up, the big story.
It's a grand welcome that Japanese Premier Shinzo Abe will not forget in a long time. The warmth between Prime Minister Modi and Abe was on display as the two travelled together in an open jeep from the Ahmedabad airport to Sabarmati ashram. After all, Japan has been India's best friend in good times and bad. Experts say strong bonds with Japan will give a big push to the Modi government's focus on infrastructure development and defence production. On its part, Japan will hope for wider access to the Indian markets, even as it eyes rich demographic dividends from the young Indian workforce. But all eyes are on bullet trains, as Modi and Abe lay the foundation for the over 530-kilometre-long high-speed rail link between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. The project, a poll promised by Prime Minister Modi in the run-up to 2014 general election, will cut the commute time between the two financial hubs to 3 hours from 7 hours currently. Ties between India and Japan have blossomed as Modi and Abe increasingly see eye to eye, encountering growing Chinese assertiveness across Asia. In fact, Japan was the only major country that supported India during the Doklam standoff with China. And with relations between the two countries going well beyond trade and politics, it is surely celebration time in Ahmedabad. Neha Bothra, ET Now, Mumbai.
To discuss all of that in more detail, we are joined by an stellar panel right here. Rajat Nag, NCAR, KVK Shwan, Distinguished Fellow ORF, Sushant Sareen, Strategic Affairs Analyst, Sarah Watson, Associate Fellow, Wadhwani Chair in the US-India Policy Studies. Thanks very much, each one of you, for being with us. And Professor Nag, I'm going to really begin with you. The whole idea and the whole narrative about Indo-Japan ties is, can we counter China's economic aggression, and will this bloc together be a buffer to the threat that keeps coming from China, a Doklam-like repeat? So there are two questions there. Can we counter China's economic aggression, and is this also India's buffer to counter China's Doklam-like crisis that emanates from that soil?
I would cast it just a bit differently. I think we're going to see a multipolar Asia. Obviously, China and India are going to be very important. And our alliance with Japan, for historic reasons, for political reasons, for economic reasons, are very important. So I think, yes, definitely China will find India-Japan alliances somewhat of a countermeasure. It is a positive move. But I wouldn't sort of put it again, as I said on a previous discussion, as a zero-sum game. I think India, China, Japan, Korea are going to be part of a multipolar, flexible geometry in Asia. And that's the perspective we should look at. From a security point of view, I think you're absolutely correct. Japan, India, and also Australia, Korea, they really form part, and the US to a large extent, form a part of a diamond concept of security. And they're keeping the navigation free in South China Sea, giving credence to India's Act East policy with Japan as a partner, all become important. And I think China will recognize that India is not alone in this whole game. India has got allies and India has got partners, and I think it does act as a countermeasure to China. To that extent, yes, I think that's a very important alliance that we have with Japan.
All right. A multipolar Asia does act like a counterbalance to China, India, US, not in such binary terms as some experts make it out to be. Sushant Sareen, I want to ask you about this whole Modinomics and Abenomics. Enough has been written and said about this. There have been a lot of news, print and space on Indian television dedicated to this bromance. How best can the two leverage this opportunity? And also, how does Modinomics complement Abenomics?
Economics is expansionary in its scope. Unlike the previous Japanese economics, I think Shinzo Abe has, some would say, taken a risk and gone in for a much more expansionary sort of economic policy, which suits us perfectly well. There are limits to what the Japanese can do in their own country. India serves as a very good growth partner for the Japanese, and that serves our interest also. I think what is important to understand is that unlike till the 80s and 90s, when frankly India-Japan relations were not that hot, and you ask the diplomats who used to deal with the Japanese in those days, and they have some very nasty memories about how the Japanese used to treat us. I think now the whole thing has turned on its head, and there is a massive strategic convergence, also an economic convergence, which is going to help this relationship and propel it forward. So I think you just contrast what happened when Xi Jinping was in Gujarat in 2014 with the sort of scenes we've seen today with Shinzo Abe. And I don't think the Japanese are going to encroach on any Indian territory like the Chinese did. The Japanese are not going to test the will of this government the way the Chinese did. And in fact, both Japan and India have an interest because they have a common threat perception from the Chinese. Just one more point. I think it is very important for people to understand that China's rise was actually on the back of investments made by the Japanese, the US and Taiwan. Now, if supposing with the greater Chinese assertiveness and aggression and the kind of encroachment that they are doing, if India can manage to attract the companies from these three countries to come and invest in India, frankly, the gap between us and the Chinese can be reduced much faster than what is currently being envisaged. So I think it is something which works well for us. Of course, I must add a caveat that there are certain very important things which India needs to do so that it becomes a viable and profitable growth partner for most of these countries. Unfortunately, we haven't done enough in that regard.
Okay, Sarah Watson, I'm going to come to you before I take it to Mr. Keswan. And I think the broader point that Sushant Sareen did make, that Japan will be very interested to invest in India, and that whole arrogance about India has perhaps gone. India stands to gain a lot from the management of quality and management of systems to learn from Japan. But what are some of the things that Japan will be looking at in turn? What is it that Japan would like us to change in terms of ease of doing business, or in terms of the reforms that it would like us to undertake? Because it isn't rocket science, it isn't state secret that the Japanese population is aging, whereas India has a youth surplus and will continue to be for many, many years. And this is where the market is. Japan can use India as a launch pad, not just for the rest of Asia, but also Africa.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I think you're right to indicate that Japan sees India as a very important market. And I think its concerns about ease of doing business are going to be similar to the concerns of international corporations all over the world. They'll be looking for regulatory predictability, regulatory sense. What a lot of companies say is, all the laws don't have to be in my favor, but I want to have a sense of what the laws are going to be when I make my investment. On top of that, Japan is obviously very interested in civil nuclear cooperation, which is an incredible step forward given that Japan-India relations went into a deep freeze after the 1998 nuclear test. So the fact that they're now talking about nuclear cooperation is incredibly significant. I think also Japan will be looking at India as a market for defense products. So there's been talk that the US-2, the Japanese biplane, could be sold to India. That would be a very important sale. And what I think everyone would like to see is some co-production, some make in India element of that sale.
Fair point indeed. Mr. Keswal, let me bring this to you. And you know, while one would want to see what kinds of engagement will happen on the defense and the nuke front, and I know a large part of this discussion should be about the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, should be about the bullet trains. I'll get to that in just a bit, but I do want to touch upon a very crucial issue, and that is the Asia-Africa growth corridor. Do you believe that initiative that Japan and India have undertaken can perhaps be an alternate, or perhaps is a suitable alternate to China's one belt, one road? And because, you know, many people believe that in some sense is neo-colonial, and this is more, this is more participative in that sense. And how crucial or significant will that be in this partnership between the two countries?
I think it's a very important development, even though it's of recent, origin. I think both Japan and India have already got themselves involved in the African situation. You may be aware that Japan has been conducting what they call TICAD conferences for so many years now, and Japan has already invested a great deal in Africa. It has also earned a good name, that it has got a very good impression. Similarly, I think our strategy also in Africa has been to boost our presence, boost our economic interactions with many countries. One additional advantage we have is that we have a huge diaspora there, and of course our image also is excellent there. And it can, I think this Asia-Africa growth corridor can be an alternative to what the Chinese are planning with regard to this Belt and Road initiative. Of course, as we have already mentioned, I think this is going to be more participatory, it is going to be more democratic, it is going to be more consultative, etc., etc. But I think basically, I think both Japan and India want to build capacity in Africa, want to build human resources, and also want to make many connectivities in both the continents. Right. I think they can really do that because both Japan and India have got fairly good experience in Africa, and I think that can really help them in that kind of corridor.
You're actually pointing me to two questions. One is Africa, and can India perhaps concede its space to Africa, because India is the one that has exposure there. And Professor Nag, if I may ask you, I was tempted to actually take up a follow-up with Sushant Sareen. I'm going to go to him next. But Professor Nag, I wanted to come in there. You know, as far as India is concerned, India has a lot of exposure in all of Africa. Japan doesn't. And which is why many people believe that Japan can perhaps use India as a launch pad for Africa. But is there concern also that India will end up conceding space and playing second fiddles to Japan in that equation?
I don't think so. I think there is a possibility of a win-win for both Japan and India. Japan also has access in Africa. Japan has invested significantly in Africa. But Japan has superior technology, Japan has capital, Japan has experience. India has maybe greater political clout, greater political acceptance. So I think there is a synergy between India and Japan in Africa. And as you said quite rightly, Supriya, it doesn't have to be a counter to China's BRI, but again, I do see that as an alternative. And sometimes countries will probably take a bit of both, and that is going to be competitive pluralism, which is good. But Japan and India both stand to gain, because as you said in your opening remarks, there is a lot of complementarity, and demographics is the major driver for Japan and India. India, a growing young population, Japan, a shrinking, aging population. Japan needs the market, India needs the goods and technology and capital that Japan might provide. And I think that game will play out well in Africa as well, both to the advantage of India and Japan.
Fair point indeed. We have the young population that you can perhaps sell stuff to, and we will be welcoming your capital as well as your goods. But talking about capital, Sushant Sareen, there's been a lot of talk about re-energizing the Mumbai-Delhi industrial corridor. And you know, its ramifications are not just significant because of this whole corridor, but you know, the whole Make in India impetus or jobs creation and other things like that. I'm interested to ask you, Japan has invested about $4.5 billion there. And yet, it's a project that hasn't really lived up to fruition. It hasn't really lived up to the hype. What should one expect in this visit of Abe as far as the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor is concerned, given that this really plays along, this really aligns with the government's own Make in India initiative?
I think I don't think we should underestimate what the industrial corridor has managed to achieve. There's of course a lot more which needs to be done, but I think there have been important lacunae on the part of our policies as well, and I don't think we can just shake our hands of this whole thing. So I think it's important, which is what I was saying, the caveat which I added right in the beginning, that we need to ensure that we have much more investor friendly policies in India, which clearly we don't have. We need very important taxation reforms, legal reforms, all sorts of other reforms, which unfortunately simply haven't been done so far. Now the point is that once you start doing that, the utility of the corridor is not just going to be what the Japanese are going to come and invest out there, but it will also be what Indian businessmen invest in that whole thing, and it becomes a growth sector for the entire economy. Frankly, it's done fairly well, and when you compare it with the kind of corridors which the Chinese are seeking to set up, which actually end up indebting countries to a point where they become, it's worse than a neo-colonial model actually. It's more of an imperialist model where they have these captive markets and what have you. So I think compared to that, the industrial corridor, Mumbai-Delhi industrial corridor, can become a sort of a beacon to everybody else and can serve as a very good model. So from the point of view of the Make in India, from the point of view of getting into defense production, all sorts of other things, I think the potential is amazing. And frankly, there have been a lot of carping sounds about, this bullet train coming in. We've heard these kind of carping sounds every time some new technology starts coming into India, some massive new development starts taking place. There are these naysayers, mostly from the left, who have to crib about anything good which might be happening out here. But look at the kind of technology advancement which comes in, even for your normal railways, with the coming in of something like the bullet train.
Right.
So I think and the bullet train really ties in very well with the industrial corridor which is coming up. So I think if you look at it holistically, it's a kind of a win-win, and between India and Japan there are only complementarities which both sides need to exploit and build upon.
And the fact that we have no apparent conflict with Japan just helps, doesn't it? But I'll just build upon that point. I was going to move to bullet trains next, but I'm glad you spoke about it. I'm going to build upon that point because tomorrow is really the big, the whole cornerstone being put there. Sarah Watson, there has been a lot of talk about this bullet train and the kind of investments that it will entail. $16 billion, 81% of that money is going to come from Japan. Prime Minister Abe is going to kickstart things tomorrow. And Sushant Sareen is right. There's always been this debate, does India really need a bullet train? I think the debate is absolutely pertinent at a time when, we are seeing very basic safety of Indian railways missing. And Indian railways will have to foot some part of that bill, at least 10% of that cost. Is it really worth it is the big question. Sarah Watson?
It's a really excellent question. And perhaps this may betray me as being on the left. I am a little bit skeptical. I'm not sure that the economic analysis is there, that there is a need for this train. However, it's basically free money. And so you aren't going to get free money to build other things from Japan. So there's really a lot of pros and cons on both sides. Now that you have Piyush Goyal leading the Railways Ministry, he's an extremely energetic minister. He said that he can get it done by 2022. That would be huge. And I think it would show Japan that India is capable of executing on these big projects. And when I talk to Japanese officials about their infrastructure work in India, one of the things you hear is that things move very, very, very slowly. So to get a huge project like this done on time, perhaps even under budget, that would be a huge win. And I think it would give a fillip to Japan's energy and interest in investing. I mean, you look at the Chennai-Bengaluru corridor, they've been talking about that since 2011, and it hasn't even started. So if you're a Japanese investor, you really want to be in India, you want to be engaged with India, but it's difficult to get attached to projects that actually move. So if this train does move, if the project does move, that alone would be a great reason to do it.
Okay, so we have a skeptic in Sarah Watson as far as the bullet train project is concerned, and things move too slowly on the ground, let alone a bullet train. Sushant Sareen is a big votary, but I think you wanted to make a point quickly there, Sushant, because I want to take a follow-up with Professor Nag there.
Just a very short point. See, it's it's not just about the amount of money which is going to be poured into this project, and maybe that money could be used elsewhere, but that is an argument you could just carry on endlessly with everything. But
it's an
more
importantly, I agree.
at a time when we are talking about technology transfers from the rest of the world, when new technologies come in, you train your own people on cutting edge technologies, you learn new processes, new procedures, you have a kind of a backward and forward linkages. It's not just a white elephant which is coming in, which has absolutely no impact on the rest of the economy. So I think if you look at it in
right.
a much more holistic manner, then this is a very, very valuable project, and if it's coming in of free money, then I think even the better for it.
I like the word that both of you are using, free money. Both Sushant Sareen and Sarah Watson says this is free money, so how does it really matter? Just for the benefit of our viewers here, let us tell you. In March of this year, Suresh Prabhu did tell the parliament that it's going to cost about 98,000 crore rupees. Piyush Goyal says we'll get it done 2 years earlier. It's going to cost us 108,000 crore rupees. 81% of that money is going to come from Japan at an interest rate of just 0.1% per annum to be repaid in 50 years, over a 15 years moratorium. Professor Nag, are there any free lunches ever?
No, there aren't, but there are gifts, and if the gifts are used properly, that's very productive. I think this is one example. Japanese money, the 50-year money, 0.1%, 15-year grace period. If it is not used well, that is, at the end of the day, if we don't have the bullet trains, then there is a cost to it, and the cost is an opportunity cost. What more or what else could we have done with that money which, say, Japan is giving us, or somebody is giving us, or we are borrowing essentially? Because we could have invested them in schools, we could invest them in hospitals, and we need all of them. But I would say that there is no free lunch. Therefore, it's extremely important that the project, the bullet train project, is implemented properly, implemented expeditiously. Eyes are not taken off the ball on that, as it were. But I would like to add one point, Supriya, and that is, I think development of infrastructure can't be a binary, can't be either you do bullet train or you improve the safety on the tracks. You need to do both. And I'm reminded,
I can't agree with you more there. I agree.
When Japan was considering the bullet train project, the Shinkansen, I think the World Bank had said, no, Japan should not develop the bullet train, the Shinkansen, because it's not viable. And of course, history has proven otherwise. So I think we need to go ahead with the bullet train project. Just as much we need to work on the safety of the tracks. But the projects must be implemented well and implemented expeditiously with due concern for social and environmental impacts.
Right. There can never be a binary to infrastructure, can there be? But Mr. Keswan, let me bring this to you, and let's open another front in this debate very quickly. I'm very short on time. I do want to address this whole issue. There are no apparent conflicts that India has with Japan, and so many people believe that the defense and the new cooperations that India and Japan have been speaking out over many, many meetings, this is the ripe and the right time to go ahead and explore some of those. But what, the two questions. What will that exploration really mean between India and Japan? And what does this also mean to India's traditional partners, a US, a Russia? Are we opening yet another new front as far as our defense and our new cooperation is concerned?
I think defense cooperation is a very important area where we can really, enhance our partnership. Already, I think a number of agreements have been signed since 2014. And recently also, of course, there was a defense dialogue between Defense Minister Jetli and his counterpart, Vanadera, there about a week ago. I think the joint statement clearly indicates, shares various, areas where we can really push our defense cooperation. For example, maritime security is another area, I think they have indicated also. And also defense technology. I think we have still not reached the stage where we can say that we have really exchanged our defense technologies very profitably. I think there's one area I think we have to really explored very seriously. And I think, as I said earlier, maritime security itself opens up new opportunities for both countries to push our cooperation. I think there are several other areas also one can indicate.
Okay, I have time for one last question. I'm going to squeeze this in very quickly with Sushant Sareen. And Sushant Sareen, Japan has been known for its manufacturing and its technology the world over. You go and buy anything that's Japanese and you are assured of quality, even today. What is it that India can leverage the Indo-Japanese trade ties for? How does India pick up the whole Japanese management of quality, the Japanese management of systems? I know there's an MOU that we have in some sort of a way with skill development, but is that enough? How do we take this forward while Prime Minister Abe is here?
Frankly, if the government is going to rely on MOUs at a government-to-government level and you have public sector trying to bring in skill development, I think you can kiss the whole thing goodbye. We know the Indian government is notoriously inefficient and it can't deliver on this. So I think the better way to do this would be to try and facilitate private sector joint ventures and what have you. Let's just take the case of Maruti Udyog. When Suzuki Motors came in, it's transformed the entire Indian automobile sector. To me, I think that is the kind of model which we need to go by. The way the workshops work, the way the processes are, have been initiated, the kind of quality controls and mechanisms and training which is given, I think that is the way to go, and that is what the government needs to push for. Just going in for a ministry to ministry kind of a skill development, I think that's just a photo op, nothing more than that. So I think if this government is really serious about kick-starting Indian growth, kick-starting Indian industry, improving quality measures, then I think they need to encourage the private sector and probably propel it forward to go ahead and strike these kind of alliances and give them whatever tax breaks or whatever other breaks they need to be given so that they can set up shop out here. And that's the way to go, and that's the way technology will come in, and that's the way innovation will come in.
All right. On that note, Sushant Sareen, thanks very much for that. But Sushant Sareen, Rajat Nag, Mr. KV Keswan, and of course Sarah Watson, thanks very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate. We put the spotlight on some very other important Indo-Japanese issues, bullet trains to begin with, and that's going to be kickstarted tomorrow. Keep your date with ET now. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. Top 10 at 10 follows next.